Think about this morning. You woke up, walked a few steps, and had instant hot water. No effort, no thought. You used soft toilet paper, mint toothpaste, scented soap. Everything worked. Everything was there when you needed it. We repeat these small luxuries so automatically that we've forgotten they are luxuries at all. We assume people in every era had some basic level of hygiene and privacy. That assumption is completely wrong. Nothing will shatter that assumption faster than one ordinary morning in the most famous city of the ancient world. Step into 1st century Jerusalem, the city where Jesus walked, and your biggest shock won't be the language. You'd walk through the gate into a wall of noise and heat. Thousands of people and animals in narrow stone streets. Roman soldiers were everywhere, armed, cold, completely indifferent. Military occupation wasn't a backdrop, it was the daily air. The writing on the doorposts was Aramaic. Nothing around you would look, sound, or smell like anything you knew, but none of that would break you. Your real crisis would start the moment you needed to use a bathroom. Most people's image of ancient Jerusalem came from Hollywood. Swept streets, peaceful crowds, everyone in perfect white robes. Men with clean, flowing hair, serene faces, moving through golden archways. A beautiful image, almost entirely invented. The real Jerusalem was excavated from the ground by archaeologists, and what they found destroys the fantasy completely. Life in the 1st century was a constant, violent assault on every human sense. Jerusalem was loud, hot, and foul. Forget soap, forget running water, forget toilet paper. We're going behind the scenes of daily life in the ancient world. The open marketplace alone would overwhelm you. Hundreds of vendors shouting, animals defecating in the lanes where food was sold. Water wasn't something you turned on. Every drop was hauled by hand, stored underground and carefully rationed. The Romans built stone aqueducts, miles of channels that moved water from distant springs by gravity alone. But even with aqueducts, the streets weren't clean. No trash collection, no sewage system, no one in charge. From the city walls at dusk, Jerusalem looked magnificent. Limestone glowing gold, the temple above everything. Distance hid the truth. This was a real, thunderously alive ancient city. Smoke, commerce, prayer, livestock, soldiers. All at once, all day. The most brutal cultural shock in ancient Jerusalem wasn't violence or hunger. It was finding a bathroom. In Roman-influenced areas, the public latrina was a long open room. No stalls, no doors, no privacy at all. Dozens of holes were carved side by side into a limestone bench. You sat shoulder to shoulder with total strangers, and it was completely normal. People had full conversations there, politics, taxes, market gossip, a genuine social space. Below the bench, a channel of flowing water carried waste away. The engineering was clever. What came next was not. The floor channels ran constantly, fed by the city's aqueduct. Hundreds of people used this room every single day. The room had open upper walls and no partitions, built purely for function. Privacy simply wasn't part of Roman design. The cleaning tool used in these latrinas had a name, the xylospongium, a sea sponge tied to a wooden stick. You'd clean yourself with the sponge, rinse it in the floor channel, then dip it in a shared bucket of vinegar water. The vinegar was the only disinfectant available. Barely chemistry at all, but it was everything they knew to use. Then you left the sponge in the bucket for the next person, shared by hundreds daily. No film has shown you that. The Jewish population was deeply uncomfortable with Roman latrinas. Their strict modesty laws made the open room feel like a violation. The Jewish alternative was a simple clay chamber pot in the corner of a room, private, but far from pleasant. Many people walked outside the city walls before dawn to open terrain far from the observation of their neighbors. That terrain was dry, rocky Judean hillside. Flat rocks and dry leaves were the toilet paper, a smooth stone or a handful of vegetation. That was what most people in the ancient world used every single day. Every morning before the city woke, figures moved in the gray light toward the open hills beyond Jerusalem's walls. Inside the wall, organized city life. Outside, where the body's most basic needs were handled with rock and patience. Before you judge Jerusalem as filthy, understand this. Its people had a deep, obsessive commitment to cleanliness. Just not ours. Their obsession wasn't with bacteria. That concept didn't exist. It was with ritual purity. The law of Moses was explicit. Touch a contaminated object, handle a body in mourning, contact with blood. Each act made you ritually impure. An impure person was barred from the temple courts, excluded from festivals, cut off from the life of the community. The Temple Mount was the heart of everything: economy, law, identity. Being excluded from it was devastating, not symbolic. The law covered every situation. Touch a dead animal in the market, impure. Handle blood-stained cloth, impure. To be impure was to be visibly separated from your people. You could see the temple. You just couldn't enter. These ancient texts were recited in synagogues throughout the city, drawing the line between pure and impure every single day. The hand-washing basin at the market entrance wasn't courtesy. It was theology made into a practical daily requirement. Washing before eating, before prayer, before commerce, legal requirements as binding as any Roman tax law. People policed their own purity because exclusion from the temple and community was worse than any financial penalty. So Jerusalem developed an engineering solution to a theological problem. Thousands of ritual baths cut into the bedrock. They were called mikvahot, carved into the limestone of every neighborhood, a hidden network making spiritual life possible. The mikveh wasn't luxury. It was infrastructure, as essential as the aqueduct, and it looked nothing like a modern bath. Stone steps led down into a cold rectangular pool cut into bedrock. No decoration, no warmth, dark water and stone. Every dimension was specified by religious law: depth, volume, shape. The mikveh was theology built in cubic feet of water. The water had to be living water, water that arrived by its own power, never touched by human hands. Winter rain was channeled through carved stone into the reservoirs below. Spring water flowed underground by gravity. No buckets. Every winter storm in Jerusalem was sacred, rain filling the channels, renewing the mikvahot, preparing for the dry months ahead. The mikveh had a divided staircase, one side for descending impure, one side for rising clean, architecture enforcing the ritual. You entered without clothing and submerged completely. Every inch of skin, every strand of hair. No exceptions allowed. When you rose from the water and walked up the purified side, the ritual was done. You were restored to community life. Archaeologists have found these pools beneath homes, workshops, and markets across Jerusalem. Every family needed access to one. The mikveh is one of archaeology's most revealing finds. Not a symbol for elites, but everyday infrastructure carved in rock. Let's talk about washing the body. In the ancient world, that was a very different problem than it is today. A Jerusalem carpenter ended his day coated in sawdust, sweat, and baked on Judean dust. Without real soap, how do you clean that? The answer was olive oil, thick, bitter, from the last press of the season. Poured generously over the skin. The oil loosened the grime from the pores and softened calloused skin. Then came the real tool, the strigil. The strigil, a small curved blade of bronze or polished bone. No cutting edge. Its only job was to scrape. You'd press the curved edge against your skin and drag it down firmly, pulling off ribbons of dark, oily grime. Every surface got this treatment: arms, chest, legs, back. The strigil pulled out what the oil had loosened. What came off was dark and waxy: road dust, dried sweat, olive oil. Archaeologists find these tools throughout the ancient world. After scraping, a few jars of cistern water rinsed the last residue away. Precious water. Not one drop wasted. The result was a genuinely clean body. The only issue, you smelled powerfully of olive oil. That was what clean smelled like. Look down at the street. In first-century Jerusalem, the pavement was cracked limestone covered in animal waste. Everyone wore sandals, thin leather straps leaving the heel and sole completely exposed to whatever the streets contained. 15 minutes of walking through Jerusalem meant arriving with feet that were dark, stained, and deeply foul. The foot-washing ritual in the New Testament isn't poetic. It was an urgent hygiene response to a genuine daily crisis. Every respectable home kept a clay basin at the entrance. Washing a guest's feet was mandatory. Refusing it was a serious insult. The water turned dark almost immediately, as the filth of Jerusalem's streets dissolved from the skin and between the toes. When Jesus knelt to wash his disciples' feet, the shock was that someone of his standing performed the lowest household job. Jerusalem's streets weren't just generally dirty. They were systematically contaminated by thousands of animals every single day. Sheep driven to the temple moved through the same alleys where families lived and traded. The biological consequences were unavoidable. At ground level, the ancient pavement was a geological record. Organic waste dried, rained on, compressed, and dried again. Donkeys carrying hundreds of pounds forced pedestrians against the walls. The city's commerce ran entirely on animal labor. Some workers spent their days pushing waste toward the drainage channels. Relentless, thankless, never-ending labor. Stone drainage channels at the base of every alley carried liquid waste downhill toward the valleys. Gravity did the work. The city was built on a ridge so waste would drain away from inhabited areas. In theory. Reality was more complicated. Roman soldiers had contempt for the street conditions. Their armor wasn't built for livestock corridors and organic filth. Scraping sandals at the doorstep before entering was a ritual performed dozens of times a day. You didn't bring the street inside. By evening, the market lanes were layered with the day's residue: broken pottery, rotting food, liquid waste, animal dung. South of the city walls, where the land dropped into a deep ravine, was Jerusalem's answer to the garbage problem. The southern wall's refuse channels delivered a constant stream of organic waste over the edge into the valley below. The Valley of Hinnom didn't just collect waste, it burned it. Continuously. Giant fires kept alive around the clock. At night, those fires were visible from the city walls, orange flames below, sending toxic smoke into the Jerusalem sky. The fuel wasn't just household garbage. It included the biological remains of thousands of temple animal sacrifices each year. From the Temple Mount, the smoke of Gehenna was always visible. A permanent dark column rising from the southern horizon. Every Jerusalem resident knew Gehenna by sight, by smell, and by its unending smoke. It never stopped burning. The sulfurous smoke stung the eyes and throat. On a southern wind, it reached deep into the city itself. This image, the never-extinguished fire of waste below the holy city, is exactly what Jesus meant by Gehenna. The channels that brought water in and carried waste out were equal parts of the same city's engineered survival. Jerusalem's buildings weren't made of wood. Forests had been stripped for centuries. Everyone built in limestone. The stone was cut directly from the bedrock beneath the city, dense and pale, shaped with iron chisels. A stonemason spent his days striking iron against rock, shaping each block to fit precisely against its neighbor. The buildings of ordinary neighborhoods rose slowly, heavy, rough blocks on lime mortar, under anonymous working hands. The walls were thick, sometimes a meter or more, not excess material. Stone mass was the only climate control. In the brutal Jerusalem summer, thick limestone walls absorbed outside heat and kept the interior noticeably cooler. Building surfaces were pale limestone, deeply shadowed in afternoon light. No paint, no covering, just centuries of weathered stone. Some alleys were so narrow that residents on opposite upper floors could pass objects to each other without leaving home. From above, the roofline was a sea of flat platforms. A second city floating above the street-level chaos below. The windows were small by design, narrow slits that blocked the brutal Judean sun while letting in air and some light. When winter rain fell, water ran from flat roofs into carved channels directed toward the cisterns cut in bedrock. Inside the thick walls on a summer afternoon, a woman grinding grain worked in a coolness no other material could provide. Interior walls were coated with thin lime plaster, sometimes tinted with red or yellow ochre. Simple, practical, quietly beautiful. At golden hour, limestone facades turned amber gold. That is the city of gold. The daily reality that produced it was much harder. From the Mount of Olives at dusk, Jerusalem glowed in the last light. Beautiful, crowded, loud, difficult, real. The flat roof was the most valuable part of any Jerusalem home, open, breezy, above the noise and heat below. In autumn, every rooftop was covered in figs laid on reed mats, their sugar slowly concentrating in the Judean sun. Grapes dried on the rooftops after the vintage, turned into raisins to survive the winter when fresh food was gone. Linen fibers spread on the rooftop dried and bleached in the dry desert wind. Textile production happened in the open sky. In summer, when stone rooms became suffocating, families carried mats to the roof and slept under the open sky. Lying on a thin mat under the stars, night breeze moving over you, not luxury, the only way to sleep. Before dawn, rooftops were already active. Women rolling mats, starting the bread. The day beginning before the sun. The law of Moses required every rooftop to have a protective parapet wall, one of the oldest building codes in history. The exterior staircase to the roof was narrow and steep, worn smooth from years of daily traffic up and down. Rooftops weren't private. Neighbors could see each other. Conversations crossed the gaps. Children ran between rooftops. Food storage on the rooftop was systematic. Sealed jars, raised baskets, herb bundles hanging from parapet wall pegs. From street level, you'd look up and see the rooftops active all morning. Women sorting, spinning, calling to neighbors. The flat stone roof served as a water catchment surface, channels directing every raindrop down into the cistern below. Moving heavy loads up and down the narrow exterior stairs was shared across the whole household. Everyone had a role. At sunset, the roofscape was Jerusalem's most beautiful view. Stone platforms glowing amber, silhouettes in the fading light. In harvest season, rooftops transformed into open-air preservation spaces, figs, raisins, dried herbs covering every surface. The roof plaster cracked every summer and needed repair before winter. As regular as the harvest, the eternal maintenance of ancient life. Before any newspaper existed, news traveled rooftop to rooftop, voice to voice in the early morning, while the bread baked. At the end of the day, a common Jerusalem family descended into a single low stone room, the entire home. The sleeping mat was the ancient world's bed, woven reed, sometimes padded with wool, unrolled on the stone floor each night. Families slept together in one room, not by choice but necessity. Body warmth was all the heat there was in winter. The heavy cloak worn during the day became the blanket at night. Ancient law even forbade creditors from keeping it overnight. In Judea's cold winters, the whole family pressed around a small clay brazier of coals, the only source of warmth. A prosperous family might have a raised wooden platform and a better lamp, small differences that meant everything. A working family's entire possessions fit against one wall. A water jar, a lamp, a locked box, rolled mats, clay pots. Before first light, the family was moving. Mats rolled, lamp relit. Grain needed grinding before anyone could eat. The floor was rough-cut limestone, the same material as the street outside. No wood, no tile. Just cold, hard stone. A woman folding a cloak in dim morning light was handling something genuinely valuable. Cloth was expensive and never discarded. While the street was still dark and quiet, a woman would already be at the stone hand mill, grinding grain for bread. A single lamp in a high window slit was the only sign of life from the dark street outside. Several clay lamps on a shelf produced barely enough light to work by. Their smoke slowly darkened the ceiling stones. Filling an oil lamp was deliberate. Olive oil was neither cheap nor unlimited. Every night's light had to be weighed carefully. A single oil lamp in a stone room was genuinely profound. A small warm circle in an otherwise total darkness. Jerusalem's streets at night were completely unlit. No lanterns, no reflected glow. Once dark, the alleys were genuinely dangerous. A man carrying a clay lamp through a midnight alley had about 2 meters of visibility. Beyond that, nothing. Water in first-century Jerusalem wasn't turned on. It was earned, through careful engineering and management of winter rain. Each summer morning, a woman lowered a jar on a rope into the cistern. That was the family's water for the day. The cistern rim was worn smooth from years of rope friction. A record of every morning the household depended on it. Cutting a new cistern into the bedrock was major construction. Men in confined spaces removing limestone by hand with iron chisels. The cistern walls had to be sealed with lime plaster. A single crack could mean losing an entire year's water supply. When winter rain came, every household focused on capture. Channels directed every drop toward the cistern inlet. Nothing was lost. Winter rain in Jerusalem wasn't an inconvenience. It was salvation. The sound of next summer's water arriving in the city. In summer, the cistern opening was sealed with a stone disc mortared in place to stop evaporation. Every drop was protected. Water carriers moved through Jerusalem every morning, distributing water to households whose cisterns had run low. The public water trough in the plaza served animals and people alike. The neighborhood gathering point, the ancient coffee shop. A cracked jar was a genuine crisis. Clay vessels were repaired and reused long past any modern standard of replacement. A family's daily water fit in a single large jar. It was measured and rationed. Running water freely was simply unthinkable. In dry season, the empty wadi beds visible from the walls said everything. White rock, no water, the landscape demanding discipline. A cup of August water from the cistern represented a decision made in January, to capture, to seal, to protect, to plan. Morning water collection at the cistern was as communal and regular as prayer. Women gathering, ropes descending, jars rising. The groove worn into the cistern rim measured time more honestly than any calendar. This many mornings, this many years. The Roman aqueduct was one of the ancient world's greatest achievements. Miles of stone channel moving water by gravity alone. Where the aqueduct entered the city, its water fed the mikveh, public troughs, and the temple complex. Life in stone. The collection pool where aqueduct water arrived was a public wonder. Clear spring water spilling over stone. Beyond the walls, the Judean desert told the truth. Pale rock, no water. Jerusalem's survival was always managed, never guaranteed. The food of Jerusalem's common people was simple and calorie-dense, built to fuel hard labor from before dawn to after dark. Bread required grinding. Every morning, a woman rotated the upper millstone against the lower, collecting coarse flour from the edge. The bread was dense, dark, and chewy, unleavened most days, cooked on hot stone or slapped against the wall of the tabun. The tabun was a community institution, a domed clay oven in the shared courtyard where households brought their raw dough. Slapping flat bread against the tabun's hot wall was skilled work. Dough had to stick, cook fast, and be peeled before burning. The bread that came out was blistered, smoky, charred in spots, the most important food in the ancient world. Around the tabun while bread cooked, the neighborhood exchanged news. The oven was the morning's social center. Olive oil was the fat of the ancient diet. Poured on bread, added to stews, used to cook everything. Olive oil was the most versatile substance in the ancient economy. Food, cleanser, lamp fuel, the foundation of daily life. A family meal was bread, olives, and wine, eaten on mats on the floor. Daily reality for most of Jerusalem's people. Wine wasn't luxury. Fermented grape juice was safer than water from uncertain sources. Wine was ancient public health policy. The Judean hillside vineyards were harvested by hand. Every cluster cut individually, pressed underfoot in stone vats. Lentils were the protein of the poor, dried, sorted by hand, soaked overnight, cooked slowly in a clay pot. The dried fig was the ancient world's portable food, dense with sugar, lightweight, stable for months. The first-century energy bar. Fresh meat was rare, expensive, reserved for the great religious festivals. Most families ate it only a few times a year. The temple sacrifice was the city's largest source of fresh meat, portions distributed to priests, pilgrims, and the poor. The stew, simmering in courtyards all day, lentils, vegetables, dried fish, olive oil, was ready when the family came home. Jerusalem's common people wore undyed fabric in every shade of beige, gray, and brown. Vivid color cost money they didn't have. The basic garment was rough linen, woven from flax, undyed, coarse and durable, and uncomfortable against sunburned skin. A wealthy merchant stood out not by style, but by color. A deep blue border on his cloak said everything. Tyrian purple was the most expensive color in the ancient world, produced from crushed sea snails, worth more than gold. When a Roman official walked through in a toga with a purple stripe, the crowd understood immediately. Color was power made visible. The working-class cloak was dense, undyed wool, coat, blanket, and rain shield in one. The law forbade keeping it as collateral. Thread wasn't purchased. A woman spinning in a doorway was producing the raw material that would eventually become clothing. A single cloak on a vertical loom could take weeks to complete. Clothing was an investment. Nothing was fast fashion. The Jerusalem market, the shuk, was the loudest space in the city. Every day, except Sabbath, pure commercial chaos. A merchant weighing lentils on a balance scale was performing a moral act. The law of Moses forbade false weights. Stone weights had to match temple standards. A merchant's reputation rested entirely on the accuracy of his scale. The fish market announced itself before you arrived. Salted Galilean fish on stone slabs, a primary source of protein. The spice merchant's stall offered brief relief, herbs and aromatics that could transform a pot of lentils into something worth eating. Money was small bronze Roman coins bearing the emperor's face, a daily reminder of foreign occupation. Social rank was worn on the body, priestly linen, merchants' colored borders, artisans' rough cloth, slaves in whatever they were given. The textile merchant's stall showed the full social range, rough gray working cloth at one end, rare colored weaves at the other. The lice comb was a standard household tool in Jerusalem, bone, fine-toothed for parasites that were universal in dense city life. Drawing a comb through a child's hair was a daily ritual across every social level. The crowded city made lice unavoidable. When the market closed, vendors carried goods home through cooling streets, leaving the day's refuse to be swept before dawn. The synagogue was not just for prayer, it was school, court, and community center. The Torah reading organized the whole week. During Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Jerusalem's population could triple. The city's infrastructure was completely overwhelmed. The temple money changers were a structural necessity. Pilgrims had to exchange Roman coins for temple currency. At dusk, the Temple Mount was Jerusalem's most beautiful sight. Last light-burning gold on stone, the city's beating heart. The lower city, at the bottom of the western hill, was where the laboring majority lived, narrow, dark, and downstream. The upper city was another world, wider streets, whitewashed walls, quieter and cleaner, the city's waste flowing away from it. Jerusalem's waste literally flowed from wealthy neighborhoods down into poor ones. Inequality wasn't abstract, it was architectural. The boundary between upper and lower city was built in stone. A change in street width, a change in block quality. The same limestone, worked by the same hands, produced two completely different cities separated by nothing but elevation. Rich and poor in first-century Jerusalem wasn't a number. It was light, smell, and whether the drainage came into your door. Understanding how ordinary people, farmers, weavers, mothers, craftsmen, survived this city is a genuine act of historical respect. These were real people solving real problems without any tool we consider basic. Every day, without complaint, without alternative. The clean, beautiful Jerusalem of films isn't an homage to its people. It's a fiction that keeps us from seeing them clearly. The real honor requires looking at the shared sponge, the rationed water, the dark room, and seeing a full human life. A laborer walking home at dusk carried the entire day. Dust in his hair, aching muscles, the hunger for bread. A mother washing her child's hands in a courtyard basin was performing an act simultaneously practical and theological. The family around the clay lamp, bread, olives, small flame. That was the complete cycle of ancient Jerusalem life. The hands of a Jerusalem craftsman told the whole story. Dark, calloused, scarred, hands that built the world. At dawn, Jerusalem was briefly still. Limestone pink, the temple at the center. Streets quiet for one last moment. From above, the city was its argument for human persistence. 1,000 years of building on the same ridge of rock. The archaeologist's brush, touching a pottery shard, touches something last held by human hands 2,000 years ago. That small clay lamp, blackened at the wick, was someone's nightly light. Now it is evidence of a life lived. Beneath the modern city, the first-century city is still there. Floors, cisterns, mikveh pools, all cut into the living rock. The next time hot water comes instantly from your tap, every generation before ours would have called that a miracle. The toilet paper roll on its holder solved one of humanity's oldest problems, answered in antiquity with a shared sponge on a stick. The modern city at night, lit, clean, effortless, is so far from the first century the two worlds barely seem related. Your coffee, your shower, your clean kitchen, not defaults, 2,000 years of solutions built on ancient foundations. The stones of Jerusalem are still there, worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet. They simply remain. Learn to see them.